Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now begin. Please welcome the CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Thank you so very much. Hi and welcome everybody. It's great to see you. Tonight we take a look at the new world of work, people and machines. Every new industrial revolution has traditionally been met with trade-offs in employment opportunities, and the new wave in industry marked by robotics, AI, the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, raises a number of questions around how robotics and machines will impact the workforce in a variety of segments. And Michael Chui of McKinsey is here to lead a discussion around how people and machines can work together most productively. With us here also to weigh in are Guido Jouret of ABB, Andra Keay from Silicon Valley Robotics, Bruce McWilliams from Bossa and Deepak Sekar from Chowbotics. Chris Hammond was also on the docket this evening and was unable to get out of Chicago. The flights were canceled and he was fogged in, so he is not here tonight for the discussion. There is always, for every Churchill program, a group of people who merit our gratitude. And we would especially like to thank Guido and ABB for making this program possible tonight. Thank you so much. And then also Peter Lowe of Zeno for his excellent project management, and Greg Wood, and Michael Chui for invaluable content and framing assistance. Thank you all. We definitely couldn't have done it without you. Few quick words about the Churchill Club. We have proudly served for over 3 remarkable decades of change here in the Silicon Valley and San Francisco Bay Area region of innovation. We present about 24 programs every year in the interest of encouraging innovation, economic growth, and social good. We think of ourselves as forward-leaning in the sense that we're trying to get at what trends today imply for opportunities tomorrow. And we always ask our speakers never to pitch, promote, or position, and we appreciate that very much. If you're not already following us, we invite you to do so on our mailing list on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And the hashtag tonight, by the way, is simply Churchill Club. So thanks very much for your attention. Let us now give a very warm welcome to our panel.
No robots? Okay. All real people here. Welcome and thank you for coming. Thanks to the Churchill Club. Thanks to ABB for hosting this discussion. I hope we'll make it interesting and informative. I'm going to just start with just a few comments to introduce the topic. There's a lot of discussion about, will there be a robot apocalypse? Will there be jobs for people, et cetera? And we'll cover a little bit of that, but I'll tell you a little bit of some of the research that we've done at the McKinsey Global Institute. Again, we do think that there's tremendous, and some of the technologies that the panel has been implementing do show what's actually possible. We've talked about analyzing every activity that people are paid to do in the global economy, and something like 50% of the time we pay people to work, they're doing activities which potentially could be automated by adapting technologies which already exist. So that does sound like potentially a robot apocalypse. But it takes actual time for some of these things to happen. So by the year 2030, we think it might be more like 15%, right? It could be higher, it could be lower, but that's the midpoint of the scenarios we modeled out. That said, we actually think that it's very rare that a machine will be able to do everything that a single person does in their job. And so it's much more likely, and we find this to be true, that there are individual activities which any person that they do in their job could potentially be automated by AI or robotics, et cetera. And so basically what this is this will affect all of us. This won't be just affect a certain number of workers in certain places. This has a wide-ranging effect. And we do see the potential by modeling fairly straightforward things like aging, like increased prosperity around the world, another billion people entering the consuming class, the need for infrastructure and buildings, the need to deploy and develop technology, energy transitions, even paying for what's currently unpaid work at home. We think there's enough work for people to do, but the challenge might be getting people from one place to another, and also how can you have people work together with the machines? And I think we'll try to cover some of these topics with our esteemed panel this evening. So you do have everyone's bio there as well, but it doesn't say exactly what the machines are that each of your individual companies do, which I think is a bit of a German linguistic construction. But in any case, Guido, let me start with you. ABB, I don't know what that stands for, but what are the machines that you make that are robots, basically?
Great.
Yeah.
So thanks, Michael. So ABB actually stands for ASEA Brown Boveri. So the roots of the company being ASEA company merging with the Brown Boveri. But let me talk about the robots. So we're one of the world's largest purveyors of robots, and most of our robots are sitting in factories. So essentially they're building cars. And one of the interesting statistics is that when we talk about the robots are coming, you actually haven't seen anything yet. 70% of the robots by value are sitting in automotive factories. So the vast majority of robots are not anywhere else just yet. But that will change, and I'm sure that my fellow panelists will describe those. But so our robots are applied in industrial context, and one of the interesting evolutions of our product range would be what we call collaborative robots. So these are robots that are designed no longer to live in cages, but who can work safely side by side with people.
Why do you put your robots in cages? That seems cruel.
It seems so awfully, I know. But basically because they're dumb. So essentially, most robots don't have sensors, and they can pick up heavy objects, but they could equally just as well take off your head. So if you put them in a cage to protect us from the robot, but the new robots, the collaborative robots, they have sensors, and they can stop, and they can make sure not to hurt you. And that's why they can work side by side with people, which opens up all kinds of new potential.
Andra, tell us what's going on at Silicon Valley Robotics.
Okay, yeah. I have the best job in the world because I don't have to make any robots myself. We know how difficult that is.
The robots do that, right?
Making the robots and making the robots to make the robots, which was always a problem with Foxconn reckoning that they would have 1 million robots in factories in 2014, is because in 2014, the sum total of all robots in the world was just over 1 million. So the question had to be, who was going to build the robots? You know, that, anyway, they didn't quite meet that goal. But Silicon Valley Robotics is an association started by robotics companies to support the growth of the new wave of robotics. And that is, at the moment, it is really centered in Silicon Valley more than anywhere else in the world. Even though fantastic research happens elsewhere, and some of the world's largest robotics companies are not American at all, nonetheless, the innovation, the vast majority of all new companies being formed and being invested in robotics is happening here right now. And Silicon Valley is so spoiled because robotics is the tiny little frog in a really, really big pond, and everybody overlooks it. But the reality is we've had 50 years of, as Guido put it, dumb, stupid robots that are locked up in cages in factories. Now we have smart robots that are capable of working outside of cages in factories and everywhere else. And so what I see is a plethora of new potential robotic marketplaces, and that can be for mobile platforms, whether we call them self-driving cars or delivery robots or drones or self-driving cargo ships, or whether we call them social robots that are having conversations with us. And I would argue that Alexa is at one end of that scale, the most simple end, but is still a social robot. And you know, part of this is, what is a robot? It senses, it thinks, and it acts. And almost every technology that we have these days is capable of sensing something in the environment around it, thinking about it autonomously, and taking an action.
So Bruce, speaking of interesting company names, Bossa Nova.
Well, the founder liked Brazil, so that's why he picked the name, Serjun. We make robots in retail. And what's kind of unique about our company, I think we're the first company to start to deploy in larger numbers robots that are right there alongside people shopping and people working. Our robots, we're in 50 stores, in Walmart, it's public. The robots go up and down the aisles of the store. They take high-resolution photographs of all the products in the store. And then there are 3 computers on the robot. And with AI, we determine what's out of stock, is the pricing correct on the product, what products are misplaced, and provide data for store operations. So we're replacing we're doing what is done by hand today. And it takes one of our robots about 2 minutes to go down an aisle and completely determine the inventory. And where a human doing that takes a long time. So,
what does it look like, this thing? Is it?
It's about 6 foot tall, weighs, I don't know, it's 300 pounds maybe? 250. And it has 15 high-resolution cameras and then 10 LiDARs and depth sensors, and constructs a 3D map and can see people and go around the people, keep track of what it's missed so it can go back and take that. And today, they run 2 shifts a day, once providing data for restocking, and then later in the day, before the busy time in the store, they will run to restock. And so, that's just a kind of an overview. And you can see a video of it if you go on YouTube or something like that, I'm sure.
Deepak, Chowbot, another great name.
Hi, everyone. As the name suggests, we build robots which make food automatically. You walk up to the robot, and there's a touch screen, and you can pick the type of salad you want. Our first product does salads automatically. We call it Sally the Salad Robot. So Sally sounds like salad. That's how the name came. You walk up to the touch screen. You can customize your salad the way you want. You can tell the robot how many calories you want in your salad, and the robot automatically makes the salad for you. And so we've seen adoption. It's meant for office cafeterias and restaurants and hotels. We've seen adoption in the office space in the beginning. And the reason why we've seen excitement is if you go to an office salad bar, there's hundreds of people, often with dirty hands, that's the spoons and the food. Especially in flu season, you don't want that. The robot's a lot more hygienic. You know the calories before you make your salad as well. And one of the big draws for our product is the fact that a robot doesn't need to sleep. It's available 24/7. So many offices now provide just lunch to the employees. They don't have dinner service because it's costly to have a bunch of people prepare dinner. So what they do is they put a robot in there. People load up the robot around lunchtime and then go home in the kitchen. And employees can get food late in the night for dinner all night as well. And we've also seen there are many small offices where you can't afford to have a full cafeteria. And in places like that, people just put Sally in there, and Sally provides lunch as well as dinner.
What does Sally look like?
Sally actually looks kind of boring, not like the movies you see, not like the robots you see in the movies, because we had to keep costs down for this application, so it's a plain box. The robotics comes in on the inside because you got so many different types of ingredients.
How many?
There's 22 types of ingredients in there. And so you got to dispense all these ingredients in a weight-controlled manner, and that's where we needed a bunch of robotics.
Super interesting. So, the topic here is, the new world of work, people and machines. And, in our research, it's not the first time that we've had machines, and it's not the first time we've had workers. No. It's not even the first time that we've had them working next to each other, even if they're not, these high-tech cobots. What's changed? Why is it that we've hit a point where this has become a topic that, people talk about, on the street, on Davos, and other places? What's important about that?
I think the first part is maybe the progress of artificial intelligence, right? Where if something is just fairly dumb and mechanical, it doesn't seem like much of competition. With the progress we've seen on the AI side, now I think what we're seeing is some of these bots could be mostly software, some hardware, and they could start to displace not only blue-collar tasks, but also white-collar. So I think there's an element of that. But I also think there's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance in the public psyche, because recent research shows that about 72% of Americans are concerned that robots could actually impact jobs. But another piece of research showed that 94% of people didn't think it would actually take their job, just yours, not mine. But, so I think it's an interesting idea, but it's probably a little bit that combination of effect, right? Which is we see progress in AI, and then we project what that might mean for the rest of us.
Why did you guys get into robotics? I mean, how did you end up at this point going into this field?
Partly because if you're at all worried about what the future will bring, the best place to work out what's coming down the pipeline is as deep into the technologies as possible. So I very consciously went back and retrained in understanding robotics technologies with an interest in seeing how that would be the next wave of technology changing the way society and our economy operated. We continue to have technological revolutions, and as Roy Amara's law goes, we overestimate the impact in the short term, but we vastly underestimate the impact in the longer term. And quite often, we buy a short-term rhetoric, whether it's good or bad, and completely ignore what the long-term impacts will be, whether they are good or bad. So a lot of the rhetoric around robots taking jobs is, to my mind, it's a very shallow and short-term take that is, it's fear-based rather than reality-based. The reality is that we have been displacing jobs through computerized automation and process automation for a long time already, and that's going to continue with robots being part of it. It also gives us opportunities. Though one of the things that I find strange is that we worry about robots taking manufacturing jobs. But have you seen a photograph of factory workers? It's a roboticized task. It's not a task that we should be asking people to do. So I believe right now we have a wonderful opportunity to discuss the whole concept of work, of labor, of profit, and ownership.
Deepak.
Yeah, so I got involved in robotics because I got tired of making my food at home. So one evening I started
memory. How do you go from that to Sally?
I started building this robot which made Indian food automatically. That's what my wife and I eat. Mm-hmm. And so I built this, I'm sorry?
No, keep going.
So I built this robot which made Indian food, and I was going around showing it off to people. And I met this guy who owned 15 McDonald's stores. And he told me, instead of building an Indian food robot for your home, why don't you build a salad-making robot for my restaurant? And he felt that would be a big hit because he'd seen in McDonald's that they were trying to make a French fry robot nearly 15 years back. And they failed really badly because the robot was very complicated. It had grease, and it was getting spoiled all the time. And so his thing was build something very, very simple, which you can actually take to market quickly. And he felt salads would be one of the simplest types of food possible. And that's how Sally, the salad robot, was born. And so it's an interesting story. It came from my need to not cook every evening at home.
I am not even joking here. When is the Indian food robot coming?
So it turns out Indian food's one of the more sophisticated pieces of food to make. And the market is smaller than salads. So.
However, there are many entrepreneurs who keep trying to crack that one, because I have met a number of other Indian robot food makers, or robot Indian. Yeah.
It's a competitive market.
I remember when I was doing my PhD at Georgia Tech many years back, I had this habit of making things very complicated. And my PhD advisor, he knew I'd listen to him if he name dropped. So he said he was working 3 rooms away from Bill Shockley at Stanford. And he said Shockley always told him, try simplest cases. That was a saying Shockley's very famous for. He's even written papers about that. And so he knew that if he used Shockley's name on me, I'd listen. And I've learned since that day.
All right. Bruce, has anything happened that made this Bossa Nova 6 foot, 250 pound, it sounds like a linebacker, robot possible now? I mean,
what's made it possible now? Well, you know, I guess you know, the deep learning AI software. So, you know, it's actually quite hard to recognize the products because labels are constantly changing, you know, whether it's Christmas or Halloween, or so you just can't have a simple library, or if it's a can of soup, every rotation is there. So the computer vision or computer image processing has gotten very good with this the deep learning. So the AI got to a point making it practical. You know, I guess it's a whole host of things. Our robot is really like a self-driving car. So LiDARs and stuff that make that possible, and the compute and the algorithms for navigation around people. And so the people that know how to do that, you know, are available. And so I guess it's the same thing that's driving the self-driving car with the image processing that made it possible.
yeah, these technologies can be used at almost anywhere now, right?
Yeah.
So let's get into it, right? So this idea of work and these machines doing what people used to do. And so, Guido, let's start with you, right? I mean, you talked about your robots being in a factory and sometimes being able to work side by side with human beings, but undoubtedly sometimes they're doing work that people used to do.
Yep.
How does that evolve? You know, I mean, people are losing their jobs, right?
Right. I mean, I think I want to build on what Andrea was saying earlier, which is that this displacement of work has been happening for a long time, and this is just its latest manifestation. But there's two things. One is we actually need, there's parts of our economy where we have lots of jobs that are going empty. So in some sense, the robots are coming, and you know, just in time actually in some ways, because if you think about even truck drivers, we talk about the truck drivers are going to get displaced. Well, there's 48,000 truck driving jobs that can't find drivers. If you think about, you mentioned aging, elderly care. In Japan, they have 400,000 empty positions for people taking care of the elderly now. Think of what it's going to look like when China ages, when European countries start to age. Where are all these workers going to come from, right? So I think on the one hand, we talk about jobs getting displaced, but there's a lack of debate and discussion around the jobs that need to get filled now. And you know, that's what Tom Friedman calls sort of the black elephant, right? It's not the swan, the random event. It's the elephant in the room. And while we talk a lot about certain professions getting impacted, maybe, for example, the coal miners, that's 40,000 jobs in the US. There's hundreds of thousands. There's actually probably about 6 million jobs in the US that are currently unfilled, for which we can't find the people. And think about what that happens as we look at a planet going to 9 billion people. Where are we going to grow all that food? Well, it's going to have to be highly automated because we can't grow that food on more farmland because we don't have enough farmland to feed that many people. So we're going to have to go for urban farming. We're going to have to go for highly automated ways of producing that food. So ideally, the debate should shift to how do we cater to the growing need that we have. Jobs will always change. That, I think, is a given.
So I'm curious, as you've worked with your customers who are, I think from our research we'd agree there's enough work to be done, but people might need to do very different things.
That is right.
And the retraining and transitions, could be huge. And there are other issues about whether or not people can get to the place where there are jobs, et cetera.
That is true.
Do you see things happening on the customer side where they're addressing some of these needs?
Yeah, we see that more. Sorry, I'm going to be brief and then I'll let. But I think there's certain countries around the world where this is handled better than it is in the US. So in the US, unfortunately, and we're talking about that briefly with some of the people here present, if you get impacted, you get laid off, you're basically, okay, that's tough, it's up to you now. Whereas I think in other parts of the world, we're seeing a bit more of a social contract between employers, government, education, trying to find ways to, first of all, assure that, first of all, you don't lose your health care, you have some form of income, and then there's a training opportunity. the same technology that
Where do we see this happen?
Where do you see that? For example, in Denmark, we have FlexiCare. Was a recent article. FlexiCare or Flexicurity, I think is the actual term. So essentially it says, look, if you're impacted and your job is eliminated, then the employer is on the hook for providing retrainment opportunities. The government will continue to provide you with healthcare and some basic income so that you don't starve while you're getting retrained. And I think that ability to take away that anxiety or uncertainty goes a long way. In fact, there was a recent article also in the New York Times about a mine in Sweden where the mine is getting progressively more automated. And they asked one of the people in the mine, and they said, are you afraid of new technology? And the person basically said, no, I'm afraid of old technology. I want to make sure that I'm not going to be in a hazardous environment. I trust that the system around me will allow me to redeploy my skills to something new.
Andra.
I completely agree that the social contract can be improved in many countries. You know, there are countries, Australia's devolving, but we've had universal healthcare. France has. There are versions of dole or unemployment insurance. And I think it's sad that as many countries are moving away from these ideas, which are very important, but following on from what Guido was saying, it's not to look at it as though this industry is employing robots, therefore jobs are going, because most of the industries in which robots are being employed are ones that there is a high job vacancy rate. That includes truck drivers, it includes manufacturing. So there are more vacancies than there are kind of... Also, I work a lot with startups getting investment, and you have to argue the case for why your company is going to create value. If you're simply replacing labor which is cheap, you are not creating great value or profit. So first off, the incentive is really to be looking at robots for the areas where we do not have labor. And that includes healthcare, elder care. Agriculture is a major area where, as said, we need to double world food production in this generation. The best land to farm is the land that we're building cities on, and those cities are expanding as the population increases. Pretty much all of the arable land is currently in use, whereas some things like small autonomous farm vehicles could reduce soil compaction, and that is expected to be an 18% saving. That's returning land into usable land where it currently isn't. There's the idea of vertical farming and reducing the energy wastage of a lot of the food supply chain. There are actually some really interesting talks around at the moment with some of the vertical robotic farming companies and repurposing old shopping malls to become urban farms and distribution centers. So we're kind of repurposing the infrastructure. One of the other things as well is that fear of old machines, not new machines. I have even talked to a woman who's got a robotics company in India where she's working in agriculture. And I'm like, this is surely the cheapest agricultural labor in the world. I've seen the pictures. It's lots of women bent over in a field. And she says, yeah, but those women would prefer to have better tools. And they're willing to pay for them. So you find the appropriate technology, and instead of looking at it as a replacement for a person, it's good to look at it as an enhanced tool for the person, and that often contributes more to the ownership of labor and the profit from it. The other area is mining, for example, truck driving, and the forestry industries have the highest death rates of all workplaces. So the jobs that we worry most about are the ones that we should be keeping people out of, in actual fact. On the whole, the robots really are doing the dirty, dull, dangerous jobs. I think that's shifting a little bit now that we're starting to get real white-collar robots that are working in the shops. But certainly on the manufacturing, industrial factory space and agricultural space, I see it as a total positive. The other part about that is in the automotive industry, there have been studies that show the introduction of robots in the factory have resulted in an initial loss of jobs, but then a net increase in jobs because that factory became productive. And the factory that lost the most jobs is the one that shut down because it was no longer competitive. So as a worker, what you need to fear is not your company getting robots. You need to fear your company not getting robots.
So Bruce,
Yeah.
people talk about a retail job apocalypse, and BLS statistics, although they're flawed because they don't include warehousing, do show store employment dropping.
Yeah, so let me talk about our case in particular, but then I'd like to talk about the macro issue too. One of the best ways to increase sales, in a retail store is on-shelf availability, so that when the customer comes, the product is there on the shelf. A lot of sales are lost. I don't want to quote any numbers particularly. And the second thing is, if there are people in the store to interact with the customer, they tend to buy more. So in our particular case, our customer is finding that our robot finds 50% more out of stock or on shelf availability things. And so they need a lot more labor to restock. And a robot is not cheaper than a person at restocking, but a robot is far cheaper at doing the inventory. I mean, in 2 minutes, we do a complete inventory of an aisle. So it's not clear, and they can also redeploy people to interacting with customers and make the store experience better versus the inventory task, which any employee will tell you that's the task he most hates doing, is taking inventory. So it's not clear to me that our robot lowers the number of people. It just changes the nature of the work towards making the store a better experience for the customer. Now, macro, I see this, if we go back to 1800, 90% of the people worked on a farm. And it was very upsetting to people that machinery and automation in farming was taking away jobs. But nobody could see that there were going to be jobs in manufacturing. In 1900, 90%, or only 10% of the people work on a farm. And today, I think it's 0.7% of the people have farming or agricultural jobs. So, but net, there are many more jobs today than there were then. So I think the thing that's different today is the rate of change is rapid. And I don't worry at all about people that are young in their career who can retool. I think the issue more is people that are further along in their career and can't necessarily retool.
So 2 follow-up questions. Yeah. When will the Bossa Nova robot be able to actually restock?
Well, I think you could make a restocking robot today, but it's not cheaper than an employee doing it. The robot doesn't do it faster. A robot is an expensive piece of capital equipment. It's not as flexible. It's not as clear, So it doesn't do the job better than a human. It maybe at some point it will do more and more things, but why I got excited about Bossa Nova is, we're orders of magnitude better at doing that job than humans, and humans don't want to do that job, and it has a big impact.
And you said you weren't worried about people early in your career, which implies you are a bit worried about people later in your career.
Yeah, later in the career, it's people have more difficulty retooling themselves.
So what should we do about that?
I don't necessarily have a solution for it, but...
Well, I think we should apply some of the innovation that we're applying equally to robots to the question of education, right? And the education industry or the education model is notoriously resistant to change, but there are enabling technologies. We've seen the massively online courses. We're seeing augmented reality goggles. I mean, while they're a flop in the consumer space, in the industrial space that we serve, AR goggles are the future for new workers who have to do many things because we can make expertise available on demand. We can beam in an expert. So the idea is we could get better about how we train people as opposed to...
But maybe I will answer. I think that people need to change. I think they are already changing, but you need to change to, hey, life is, you need a continual learning and continually evolve and change yourself. It's not the case that you go to college, get an education, learn how to do a particular task, and that's it. The world is different today. you need to think differently about it and continually grow. But my guess is that robots will create more jobs than they take away, and the standard of living will go up, and people will be doing more human things versus mechanical things.
Deepak,
Yeah, so
what's going to happen to cooks?
I get asked this question a lot, and my perspective on this has changed as our robots being deployed more. I learned a bunch of counterintuitive things as we've deployed our robots in the field more and more. So the way our robot works is someone needs to prep the ingredients before they load it inside the robot, and then the robot dispenses everything. So it's kind of like a salad bar where you already prep it and you put it in there. So compared to a salad bar, the labor is pretty similar. But one of the things we learned, which we never expected, we found out convenience stores are a huge market for us, because convenience stores are losing tobacco revenue in a big way right now because of legislation, and they want to bring fresh food into their stores. And now with convenience stores, they don't have labor there right now, so they can't afford labor. They want food 24/7. It's tailor-made for robots, and I never expected that when I started the company. And so you have all these convenience stores who want to put the robot in there, and someone needs to prep the ingredients somewhere in a kitchen somewhere else. So you're actually adding jobs there. You're adding jobs for people to go and take the ingredients from the kitchen, from the commissary kitchen into these convenience stores. So there's 100,000 convenience stores out there who are someday going to use robots, and they're going to add new jobs for people prepping the ingredients and delivering them to the stores and refilling them. So I never expected this to happen. That's one thing you see always with automation. It always creates new markets, new jobs, which you didn't expect to happen. For example, when ATMs first came in, people thought, these ATMs are going to take away all the teller jobs. But if you looked at what's happened in the past 20 years, the ATM actually reduced the cost of setting up a new bank branch because you needed far fewer tellers. And the number of bank branches went up quite a bit. So you actually have the ATMs did not cost a ton of bank jobs. The number of bank jobs has actually gone up. So I think we'll always have to keep an eye out for these new markets which robots enable, and we need to go after them as well. Now, with robots, the other thing to consider is robots have a bunch of advantages compared to humans, and cost is just one of them. For our robot, for example, you have benefits in terms of health and wellness and hygiene, and our robots are available 24/7, something you can't get from a human. And as a company, we made a conscious decision to go after markets where you gain from the benefits of robots, like the 24/7 availability or the health, and we don't want to go after labor cost reduction opportunities. And so as a company, we want to do good to the world. We want to make people healthy. We don't want to cost jobs, and there's enough robot applications out there where we can make plenty of money without costing jobs, and we're going after those.
So you're trading cigarettes for salads?
Yeah, that's better, isn't it?
That makes it sound good.
There's an interesting angle around this that comes up over and over in the new robotics businesses that I talk to, which is you start with a really direct analog where it's going to make the salad, and it's starting in shops where there's a person that's making the salad and that shop is selling the salad. But as it rolls out, it becomes a and then what? And it moves into new shop areas, or a new value is discovered around the process. So for example, Savio, the hotel delivery robot, discovered that while the delivery was advantageous, the real reason that hotel chains want that robot is that it inserts a point of customer service in a very satisfactory, subtle way that allows the hospitality purveyors to make sure that someone's happy in a way that you couldn't do personally, but it allowed you to have one more point of contact and ensure satisfaction. So it turns out to be that and then value that is the critical value. But you started with a really direct analog. Well, you no longer have room service, let us have a robot to replace room service. Now, the things that I think about with Sally are some of the things that we talked about around the democratization of expert surgery with surgical robots, so that you could have effectively the surgical team guiding and training robots in surgery, and then that could be available to every person. I think, again, we think about what are the strengths of AI and robotics. The ability to filter and collect and sort a lot of information, more than the average person could ever do, and the ability to do it quickly and repetitively, do mundane things. So it's quite handy for surgery, also quite handy for making salads. Now, how many of us have a particular food preference or allergy or choice, and you have a very unsatisfactory discussion? You know, are there eggs in this? I don't know. I'll go ask the kitchen. Or just complete, you know, crap. Oh, no. And you're like, it looks like egg. Oh, no, no idea. You know, this is something where you will get an individualized and highly precise version of your diet in a way that, you know, already our shops are filling up with the kale salad with chicken, the edamame come Asian, the this, but I don't want soy because that's bad for me, and I want this. I'm getting really finicky about the things that I want. And now we're able to start to get that highly precise and individualized serviced. And on a flip side, we can apply that to agriculture as well. And we've had the technological revolution of agriculture, which was the tractor in 1910. Then we had the chemical revolution of agriculture. But one of the biggest things that robotics, AI, and computer vision technology can do to agriculture is the precision agriculture revolution, where we don't treat an entire field for everything. We treat only those plants that need it. So we reduce the toxins that go into our food chain, we increase the abundance of that food chain, and we reduce the energy.
Let me come back. I want to pull on a thread that Bruce mentioned before, and it's an idea that you know, economists like Eric Brynjolfsson and Ajay Agarwal talk a lot about, which is as these technologies reduce the cost of certain things, that increases the demand for the complements of what the machines are doing. And so, for instance, you know, the ability, you know, for a machine to do inventory allows greater demand for other people in the store to do other activities. I'd love to hear whether or not there are other examples that come to mind when you think about your own products and services and the experiences that you have with the technology coming into play, and perhaps actually creating more demand for human labor, you know, in adjacent spaces. Deepak.
Yeah, so one of the things we've seen in our deployments is they used to sell these box salads before. And once we put the robot in there, since you could customize your salad and you could get exactly what you wanted from it, people started buying a lot more salads. We found people buy 3 times more salads, and they start thinking of salads as a snack. So we never expected to sell salads at 8 in the morning. But people, once they see the side salad is $2, instead of buying the bag of chips from the vending machine, they go and start eating salads. They end up healthier. We've had people eat salads at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the evening. So you actually create more demand for salads. We were selling 3 times as many salads. And so someone needs to prep all those ingredients. And so it's creating new jobs in those places as well.
I think one example is, you know, we talked earlier, Bruce, you were mentioning briefly about people going to college, but recent studies have shown that sort of, you know, for the marginal student trying to go and get a 4-year degree, the returns aren't there for them. They're more likely to drop out, having spent a lot of time and effort, and then not getting a job in that area. What's kind of missing is that a lot of these highly skilled machines need highly skilled people to then service and work with those machines. And that's creating a cadre of work where you have machine operators, robot programmers. There's an awful lot of tending to these highly sophisticated machines that is the source of some very nicely paid, but also increasingly skilled labor.
And increasingly less skilled, because a lot of it is really just, can you plug it back in? Someone unplugged it. Can you go and make sure it's plugged in?
But there's actually, well, in the industrial space, the time to set up, for example, a new manufacturing plant with robots can be up to a year. So you can spend a year getting all the robots configured just so you can start production. So that's a significant task. And what's a little bit missing, especially in this country, is we've traditionally channeled everybody for education through a community college, four-year college. The vocational side, like how does a person who doesn't want to get a four-year degree become a skilled mechanic and a skilled craftsperson? And that sort of withered. We had it in the pre-industrial age. It was called an apprentice. You became indentured to someone, you became a blacksmith or something else. And
Sorcerer.
sorcerer, maybe. Maybe in McKinsey you do magic, but this notion of like, and we see that in particular, like when you look at certain countries, there's often a sort of an unemployment bulge among the young, right? Higher rates of unemployment among people 18 to whatever. But in countries that have really good apprenticeship programs for technical work, such as in Germany or Switzerland and others, the unemployment rate among the young, in Switzerland, for example, where ABB is based, it's around 3%. So there's actually no effective unemployment because there's multiple channels. And I think that's the other part, is as we start thinking about these machines and the kind of care that they need, there will be jobs that require a certain level of specialization, but it may not be a four-year degree in a classic university sense.
So talk a little bit about this, because it sounds like the new jobs that are being created require higher skills. I mean, Andra, you mentioned sometimes it requires lower skills because the technology actually does the high-skilled stuff. You know, what is it that, you know, can you take someone who's, you know, coming off the line because the robot's coming in, you know, in a cage or not, and then actually train them for this higher skill?
It's yes and yes rather than no, because there are more higher skill jobs being created, but there are also some more alternatives to current education. I think if we wait for education to fix the problems, it's going to be way too late.
Yeah.
And because of this, we're seeing the rise of MOOCs and online training courses and nano degrees. Yeah. I think we should. I'd love to see more apprenticeships. I do think the technical college model in Europe is definitely highly effective. But one of the things is, it used to be a master mechanic had years of knowledge to pull from. Now there's a lot of Google, a lot of examples online, and I think that our interface technologies can make a lot of jobs that were highly skilled much simpler. So through the use of AR, through the use of Google, there are many. I fixed my washing machine myself, and all I needed was Google, you know?
Well, you know, I think about it, it's mostly with robotics, it's like we're giving the human another power tool. So maybe before there was electric motor, you had to always saw your wood with a handsaw. So now we're giving people a power tool. And so then that frees up a lot of human potential to do other things. And it's just like, you know, everybody would have thought ATMs were going to lower the number of jobs in banking, but no, it didn't. And I think it's very hard for us to think about what happens next because we're all consumed with the way society is today. But historically, technology for the last couple hundred years has just created more and more jobs, and people are not doing all these labor-intensive or things that humans aren't particularly good at. I think it will just free up the human potential to do more interesting, creative things, and it's not necessarily higher education, but it's things that humans do well, and humans are very different than robots.
Yeah, if you look at jobs 20 years from now, right, I see them falling in two main categories. One category needs more education. The second category deals with interacting with people. And I'll talk about both of them, right? So one thing people ask me a lot about is how restaurant employment is going to look 20 years from now. So there are some jobs in restaurants which I don't believe will ever get automated. So for example, in a restaurant, right, you got tons of servers, and with servers, being able to talk with servers it's a job which needs a lot of human skill. You need to be good with people. If I go for an anniversary dinner with my wife to a restaurant, I don't want to be greeted by a robot who doesn't understand my Indian accent. So Siri still doesn't understand me. Anyway, so those types of jobs, I see them being humans for a long time. We've taken a number of surveys of restaurant owners, and they tell us they want humans serving all the time. But if you look inside the kitchen, you've got two types of jobs. You've got the lower skill jobs. There are some people who just chop up vegetables all day, and I don't know how they can do that, but those are the kinds of jobs the robots will take. But there are other jobs like the head chef or other chefs where you need skill and you need creativity, and those are going to be humans for a long, long time. So, I guess one point I'm trying to make here is if people focus on jobs which involve interfacing with other humans, they're always going to be relevant. And the second type of jobs is, as you see more and more robots and automation and AI, having a good education is a very helpful tool to have, because you'll be able to access a lot of these jobs. So that's one reason why I believe the education system in the US needs to improve. It needs to be much less expensive. And I think we are seeing steps in that direction from the private sector. For example, one of the things I like doing now, I'm trying to learn more and more about cooking. So I take culinary classes online. And I just do it on the weekend, and I know a lot more about it than I did a few months back. And it cost me almost nothing. So I think you're going to see more and more of this kind of thing where people learn new skills by themselves, and they get better and better.
That was going to be my question, Deepak. Don't you think that you said more education, but is it also, or maybe not instead of more education, is it agility in learning? Because just a personal anecdote, my daughter went last summer, and she was working at electric car company in Fremont, and she was put on the assembly line, and she came home and she was really frustrated because she goes, yeah, Daddy, I mean, they basically gave me a computer and they put me in front of where they make the electric motors, and they said, this machine is defective. And she goes like, and? She goes, well, find out what's wrong with it. And she goes, how do I do that? Go to YouTube, figure it out. And it's like, you have to write something in Python. And she goes, I don't know Python, go to YouTube, right? And so it was this, but after a week, she figured it out. And so I think this agility in learning, that doesn't necessarily correspond with a 4-year degree either, but how does our educational system evolve to such a point where we, I don't know, teach people to be agile, teach people how to think, or how to decompose problems or reassemble solutions?
Though I don't think we need to worry too much yet. I believe that is in the future, because I think our machine capabilities will improve over time, but I like to call at the moment what we have artificial stupidity, not artificial intelligence, because there is no common sense, there is no generalization, and there's no context. So I think one of the biggest jobs that's left is not just creativity and human connection, it's common sense. It's when the vegetable chopper runs out of vegetables and starts chopping something else that accidentally got left there, when the server tries to send the same meals to the wrong table, when there's mix-ups, and you don't need to ask how that happened. Was it machine error or human error? It sort of doesn't matter. Those are things that humans are incredibly good at dealing with. It's an agility, but it's not something that requires additional skill. It's like, oh, that's a problem. That's clear to me. It is certainly not clear to our artificial stupidity.
So we're going to come to the audience questions in a moment, but I want to pull on another thread that Deepak mentioned, which is what are the things that either people will always do or are going to continue to do for a while in the workplace? Because is there anything that machines won't eventually be able to do?
I think Deepak and Andrea mentioned it. So one element is context. So I think what we see the machines doing really well is task-based automation. But another anecdote, I think most jobs will be sort of computer or machine assisted in some way. Take medicine, right? So diagnosing a patient, probably the computer could do better than most doctors. Treating that patient with surgery, so pigeon?
Yeah, pigeons can be trained to detect cancer on radio.
Okay, well, I'll leave the pigeon to you. But,
because they have really good eyesight.
Yes.
So it's about recognizing the fact that pigeons have much better eyesight than people.
True. But for example, one thing that, getting back to the main story, I I think the one thing that, for example, it's well known that, for example, the elderly, they get lonely. They want to go talk to the nice man in the white coat, so they go and talk to the doctor. And the doctor knows after a while that Mrs. Jones really has nothing seriously wrong with her, but she likes to come in every couple of weeks and just have a chat with the nice man in the white coat. Well, if you were a automaton, you would be prescribing, okay, maybe it's dengue fever now, maybe it's malaria now. You would be stuffing poor Mrs. Jones full of pills. But a human being would know, like, yeah, she's old and she likes to have a chat, and it's harmless, and I do that. So context, right? So I think that context, relating to people, I agree with as well. But I think it's that human judgment and context that guides the different stages of the automation.
There's also morality. We talk a bit about ethics, and I believe that most systems, we have a process for proving that they can perform better and better. And it's not a strange thing for us to accept that machines can do better than humans once we've proven that and accept the range within which they operate. But we have a legal system because we believe that a human judgment is really part of the social contract in which we're all bound. And so there are so many things where in medicine, AI and robotics can do many things better, but there has to be a doctor involved in the treatment. And I like that the medical field has a clear understanding of that. And I think we're going to be raising that issue in many, many other fields. Where do we need to have a human hand in the process? And where are we just used to having it? And it's not actually necessary or good.
Bruce, is there a set of things that...
Well, I think entertainment and comedy would be difficult for a machine to do. Actually, I think machines could be very good in doing education. But I think in general change. But I find this a difficult question to answer because just like I would have thought for sure ATM machines were going to make less jobs, right? But I think it's very hard to look out 10 years. I think that if we have another layer of automation, society will advance, and there will be always a new frontier. So sort of as a circle of knowledge expands, the circumference of the unknown increases. And so I think we just continually advance as a society. And so just like the people were scared to death of automation in farms and losing their jobs, what are they going to do if they don't have a job on a farm? People are scared today with what is this automation going to do to their future? But so far, historically, all kinds of new opportunities open up. And so it's hard to answer. It's hard to think 3 or 4 years out. I would never have thought Facebook could be a business, right? It made no sense to me when that got started, and even when it had its $60 billion valuation, right? But it's one of the most valuable companies today.
Turns out in the long run you were right about, because actually teller employment has started coming down finally. So yeah. Let's open it up to people in the room. Are there questions? There are mics on their way. Lots to talk about here. There are a couple of questions here.
Hey, Blair Henley-Frank from VentureBeat. One of the things that I hear come up in a lot of future of work and automation conversations is that humans will get to do more of the work that we do really well because we're human, because we care, because we have some amount of creativity or abstraction that isn't well performed by robots. What does that mean for a society that seems to fairly consistently undervalue the sorts of emotional and creative labor that we're saying humans do really well right now?
That is actually a point about women and work, because the majority of these things that we call the human touch tend to be female labor, and it tends to be the lowest paid labor out. And so I think you've hit on a really interesting point there.
Anything else?
Sorry?
Fixing dryers.
I know where to Google that now. Well, these days, my mother actually just emailed me. She said, I cleared the whole house. Their dryer was playing up. And she said, I thought it was going to be really big, but I thought the dryer's really clever because it told me what the problem was and told me who to call. So I did, and they came, and they replaced it, and it was like boom, boom, boom. And we take this for granted now. You know, the dryer tells you what the problem is and who to call.
Go ahead. I don't know if I agree with the statement that we undervalue the human touch, because my sales guy makes a lot more money than I do.
You're the CEO, right?
Yeah.
One other quick comment to Guido's, looking around the world. There are different places where caring professions and other occupations, those places have decided to pay those occupations more because they value them more. So it's not universally necessarily the case.
In fact, it was shown that teachers in, was it Finland? It's the hardest profession to get into.
Yes.
You require the highest marks, and it has the longest degree training, and it is paid very, very highly. It has the best performing educational system in terms of outcomes for students, and it hasn't had to reduce class sizes. So I came from Australia, where we're reducing class size all the time, but teaching is notoriously an easy profession to get into. So there's heaps of teachers, let's keep reducing class size. Outcomes did not improve. So I believe that the example of valuing and paying highly for the social skills that we need needs to be, we need to do more of that.
Next question.
Some of the changes you suggest to make this a productive shift in society are going to require a great deal of political will, filling the gaps in the social safety net. And I have to confess, I don't often see the tech industries at those hearings. Is there, an intention to use its considerable resources and influence to make those changes happen amongst yourself, your peers in the industry?
Yeah. So it's not really a question, but I'll respond to it anyway. So we have firsthand experience with this. So as ABB a couple of years ago found itself at 150-odd thousand people worldwide, decided because of margin pressures that we had to slim down. So essentially several thousand people impacted in, for example, in Germany, as we had to close down some of our facilities. We had a choice to make. We had, on the one hand, we could lay people off and pay them a severance package. Or on the other hand, we could also help retrain. And so working with the unions, working with labor, being able to come up with an agreement to say, look, you know what, if we work on retraining, then this could be done with you as opposed to something that's done to you. And we chose that second path. And that was something which I think it's a little bit depending on the relationship also between not just government and companies, but also between companies and the unions. And what we see particularly in some smaller countries in Europe, for example, is there isn't quite the adversarial relationship between the employer and the union as there often is, for example, here in this country. And as a result, a lot of the unions are actually trying to get ahead of this whole problem of skills training and how to make sure their workforce remains relevant. And I think we might wish that be the case, but we have what we have. But I think there's probably a need for a greater dialogue, how we engender that. I think it's true that maybe some of the sort of pure software companies don't necessarily think that they are maybe relevant to this debate, but we have 275 factories worldwide. We employ a lot of blue-collar workers. We have all kinds of people in all kinds of places. So we've firsthand experience of trying to do this. But I do think I take your point. This is something that tech needs to lean into because it is causing some of this change as well.
And just to be clear, ABB retrained workers for jobs that were outside of
Yes.
ABB. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. By the way, back to your previous point about apprenticeships. Just yesterday, the Markle Skillful Initiative announced, a network of 20 governors who are interested in applying skills-based training and apprenticeships. Next question.
Hello. Hi, I'm Marie from Accenture. I'm curious, you mentioned it a little bit, some of you, with the learning agility. But as we're moving over, implementing more robotics and AI, what do you see as the top 3 things that employees need to embrace and leaders need to reinforce to ensure the transition and the culture mindset change goes smoothly?
top three. Deepak?
Yeah, so one of the things, we've got 3 or 4 cultural values in our company which we hold dear. And one of them is keep improving all the time. And so everyone in our company, we all have access to lynda.com, where we can take a number of classes and make ourselves better. So I think that part is crucial. Irrespective of whether you lose your job or not, you got to keep getting better all the time. And we got to enforce that. In terms of the education system itself, it needs to evolve to a system where you don't just learn something, you learn how to learn. And that was something we discussed before as well. So I think trying to get better all the time and building that culture is key.
Bruce, is there eighth thing? Or?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer the question, but I mean, one of the interesting things about this software is that we have to employ lots of humans because the software has to be educated and trained just like people. And so we have large numbers of humans in the loop. Let's say we're training it to identify where the labels are doing reading. There are humans in the loop, creating the data sets and training the software. And so it's not like a piece of code you write and it works. And every time we go into a new store or a different chain or whatever, the computers have to go to school just like people do. So it's not really answering your question, but it's just interesting that it creates a whole new kind of workforce out there. So we have a lot of people in India doing human in the loop, for example.
Andra, Guido, or we can go to another question?
I think one of the most important values, and it's the hardest one, it's one of the key ethical guidelines when we look at robotics and AI, and it's transparency. Because when things are kept in black boxes, when it's always somebody else's responsibility, then not only do incredible negative eventual results happen, but no one is empowered to take responsibility, and no one is empowered to learn and to develop ownership.
Next question.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Hansen, undergraduate student at the University of San Francisco. And I had a question concerning about the relation to, average person getting interested in doing robotics, AI, and why not having programs directly from these businesses or these tech companies,
sure, or
like internships that any average person can be interested in, so that you directly fill those jobs and have those as interested, wanting to learn, so that it's not just open and just there. You have those who want the job and are completely interested and would love it, that are students, business, computer science, whatever, can also attain and learn this information directly from them rather than only just putting it out there.
Yep. Anybody taking resumes?
We are?
I
should have a chat.
Everyone in robotics is hiring.
Yes.
And I think if I can fill in a little bit before Guido answers this, you've got to understand that the 50 years of industrial robotics has led to an industry, the largest aspect of the robotics industry, where I believe there's annual turnaround of 3 billion or 30 billion? 30 billion, I think, these days. But when you talk about the tech industry, you're not talking about us, okay? The majority of robotics companies, ABB is one of the giants. The rest are fewer than 30 employees or pre-Series A stage. I did the figures for investment in robotics companies, and in 2016, in 2015, we hit a milestone, and there was $1 billion invested in robotics companies that year. Well, let's put that into context. That was the same amount of money that was invested into food ordering apps. Okay? So when you talk about the tech industry, that's not robotics. okay? We're such a small frog still in this big tech pond where you've got your, even though Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, Salesforce, everybody else is doing robotics to an extent, the actual innovation part of this is so tiny. And it makes it difficult to be part of policy groups. And in terms of putting classes on, we actually rely on foresightful other parties like Udacity or university lecturers who put out free open source classes, and there are a number of those MOOCs that are absolutely fantastic, or you get a third-party course like Udacity that says, we can see that there's a growing need here for an industry that's going to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger that is not going to be serviced by the educational industry as it stands, so we will leap in and do this. So I'm volunteering to speak on behalf of all of those companies that have raised at best $1 million or $2 and have only a handful of employees. And I think you can speak about how you actually, I mean, I've been in Switzerland, it's ABB everywhere.
Thank you. So actually, we do this. For example, in North Carolina, which is where we have a fairly significant presence, we have worked with the local technical university system there. And we have 70,000 students who have access to our robots. And we've contributed courseware so that people can get trained how to configure and program robots. But there again, I'm also even bullish on the fact that today this is limited by physical access, right? You need to access a robot to be able to learn how to use it. And there's stuff coming, like for example, one of the solutions we have is called Robot Studio. You can actually simulate a robot assembly line. So you have a computer, you can now design an entire assembly line full of robots, and you can program them, make sure that they're doing the right thing, and then when you're happy with that, you can download that to a real robot if you happen to have one. So I think that's how we scaled the education. But I think before that, maybe the question behind the question, or maybe what Andrea was also alluding to, is as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about this topic. I think we need to attract a lot more people into these kinds of professions. And what I think is one of the tragedies of our education system is like, being the father of two daughters who are now in college, they had no idea what the job prospects or the job market were for any role or position they wanted to choose. And I try to guide them in terms of, yep, we're going to need a lot more industrial engineers and a lot more mechanical engineers, which is what both of them are. But it's one of those things where how do young people know what the career prospects are of certain disciplines? And I'm very bullish on robotics. I think it's going to be a great place to work, so hopefully that's your profession.
Robotics and medicine, if you're a lawyer, I'm sorry.
Yes, that's right. Lawyers are toast. But no, aside from that, I mean, look, it's a great suggestion. We're trying to do that as we can. Definitely more work required, but it's a great area.
You always have entry-level jobs in any robotics company, which someone who's not skilled at robotics can get into. For example, in our company, right, I've got people who have almost no skills in terms of technical skills or in terms of technical skills or sales skills or marketing skills. We just bring them into customer service, and then we
skill.
Well, if let's just say work experience, maybe. But so we've got other entry-level jobs. For example, we've got some people doing ingredient testing whose job all day is to make salads and eat them. So you don't need many skills to do that. You just have to press the button a few times. So
I did kind of wonder when you were learning how to cook on YouTube how you could tell if it tasted right. Anyway, sorry, Bruce.
And we've been hiring pretty rapidly, about 50 jobs in the last 6 months, and probably 150 jobs this year, and have a half a dozen interns usually. So,
resumes. All right, who's next? Yeah.
So you all seem to have a fairly optimistic view of how this all plays out for society. I know you're not futurists, but let's say it's 2030, to use Michael's point in time, and the consensus is that this has had a negative effect on society. What went wrong?
I think if it's had a really negative effect, we're not talking about consensus, we're talking about revolution. I think that's one of the things. We have it in our power to make a lot of change in the world. And I'm an optimist because, on the whole, we've been heading towards a civilization that solves problems through consensus, not bloodshed. But I think that if we really stuff things up, it'll go backwards. And nobody really wants that. So I think we're all fairly incentivized to keep things moving in a positive direction.
Yeah, I think if it has a really negative effect, say on GDP or whatever, then you would quit investing in this direction. Society or people in general, right? Well, what went wrong? I guess I can't answer that without more specifics. But I guess I've just in my 50 years of life or whatever, it's been a constant. Everybody's always so worried about the future, but as I look at the world, it's far better than it was in the 70s. Far safer. I haven't seen the negative impact of technology to date. So, maybe all of a sudden, computers are replacing people. But when I look at the nature of this software, humans are training it to do a particular task, but it's really not replacing a human. It doesn't have feelings, or there has to be an economic reason for doing it, and to be an economic reason, it has to be something people want, right? So maybe it's different today, but I think it's sort of the nature of humans to fear the future.
Instead of asking what went wrong, I would ask what could go wrong in the next 20 years. One thing which could go wrong is it's a capitalistic world right now. Jobs are going to go to the places where people work the hardest, where people get the most work done. And it could be that in some countries, if they're moving towards 4-day weeks of work, then you're going to have less jobs there compared to some place else where people work 6 days a week. So I think that's one thing which could go wrong, where the distribution of work could be more in certain countries versus others. And that's one thing we'll have to worry about.
I'm going to mention two things, just to take the privilege. One is, if we don't figure out how to retrain people at scale successfully past the first 2 decades of life, that'll be a problem. And then depending on where the gains from all these brilliant machines go to, we could see increasing inequality, and that could also be an issue. What's next? Who else has a mic?
That was actually a perfect lead into my question. So Scott Move from Microsoft. So we've talked a fair amount about the number of jobs. We've talked somewhat about the quality of jobs, but we really haven't talked about the equity here. So it comes back shortly to the first question on what type of work we value, somewhat the political side. So what is it that the robotics industry, we the tech industry, educators, regulators, business owners, what do we need to be doing to make sure all these wonderful gains you've talked about are equitably distributed across society?
I think there's a bit of an implied direction of this, which is that the robot makers are going to make out like bandits, and it's going to be fantastic in terms of creating all this wealth. It would be, I don't see that because I think there's no signs that is necessarily the case. There's plenty of competition, lots and lots of people making tools. But I do think, and it's maybe different, because I think we're kind of projecting sort of a winner-takes-all mentality on this robot landscape, which I don't think works the same way as it does for some online systems, for example. But I think in general, if I just take the premise of how do we make sure that we don't have people left behind, one of the things that, again, I'm going to go back to the social contract, but I think it's a combination. It's a three-way system of education,
employers, and government. And I think it really is this combination, because if we end up producing millions of people with skills that nobody wants to pay for, then somebody somewhere sent the wrong signal to say, like, these are not the kind of workers, employers that we need, right? So I think, or employees that we need. I think in the case of companies, having people in the street with pitchforks trying to scream for the heads of the bosses of these companies isn't also conducive to prosperity and everything else, right? So we want to try and have a system whereby we have plenty of people available to do the jobs that we would like to pay them to do, and thereby we would prosper.
Yeah, I think both of these questions are very, very similar. And the increasing disparity, the inequality of the distribution of wealth is fundamentally the biggest problem that I believe we face, although shortage of food and food security is kind of right up there with that as well. But this is where I'm saying I believe that it's a little bit, as much as it's a major problem, it's also potentially self-corrective, because the 1% won't survive if they make the rest of the 99% too hungry. So there is a little bit of measure there. But I do strongly, I think that Piketty is definitely on the track, where one of the issues now is not labor issue, it's the shift of labor to capital and what we do about that. But I think that there is also some really interesting opportunities there. And right at the start, Michael said a very interesting statistic, which is that for all of us here, 50% of what we do each day is probably going to be automated. And I thought, which 50%? Okay, 50% of what I do all day at work is not necessarily work, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest. How much of our work time do we spend playing words with friends, looking at the news headlines, maybe checking on our stock portfolio or our Kiva loans, whichever it might be, or just sending a few messages, even theoretically amongst our work colleagues? Or heaven help us, if it's a boring job, then we are catching up on the latest serial or doing other things while we're working. So I think that this is a very underlooked thing. We talk about education as the way that we're going to solve this problem. I think we're smart enough to do really interesting interaction. And the online game industry is now wealthier than the movie industry. What about we turn work into something that we would pay to do because it's so much fun? You know? At the moment, if you tell someone, let's re-educate you or retrain you, it's like, oh God, do I have to? What if it's, you know, we want you to eat salad all day or play these really cool games? And I think that's an interesting way to look at it for the youth who have been very disenfranchised from technology. Because what do they aspire to do? They aspire to play sports, or these days to play video games, because the online game community, or to make music. Now, these are digital interactions in the large part that we can perhaps be more creative about how we reincorporate that and maybe make all work something that's pleasant rather than something that you suffer through. I mean, don't we think that work is something that you don't like?
Next question.
Hi, I'm Christine, and I work in security. So it's a question about what could go wrong.
We have robots for security too. I don't like it, but.
Well, we live in a world where there's a marketplace for security vulnerabilities, and so I'm curious just to hear about, like, you know, what are the safeguards that each of your companies are putting in place to, you know, secure the robots that will one day be alongside humans?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, it's one that definitely concerns us, because as we've seen with things like Stuxnet, right? So for a long time, the industrial world kind of assumed that viruses and cyber hacks were a problem for IT. But in fact, it's often the industrial equipment that's the oldest and the most vulnerable, and could also potentially cause some real harm if it's not properly protected. So it's, as Chief Digital Officer for ABB, I worry about this quite a bit. It's partly my job on the line if this isn't going well for ABB, so I'm motivated. But It's a particular thing that we focus on with all of the latest technologies that are available, but it's also, in some sense, a never-ending arms race. As you know, there's no perfect security. It's always a question of degree, and frankly, the weakest link in the chain is often the person working the machine.
Yeah, I think one of the things about robotics is that it is simply enterprise software on wheels. You know, so a lot of the problems that we face, we've already kind of, I won't say solved, but we know how we go about solving them, and we know where the issues are. Perhaps it raises an interesting kind of extra question, because I think in many ways open source is quite a good way to keep ahead of that arms race, like have as many people as possible trying to find your weaknesses helps you protect against them. But you do run into a different equation when that weakness might be with a 50-pound swinging metal object. But on the other hand, software controls elevators and other things like that. So, you know, hey, does anyone remember the year 2K, Y2K bug? Okay. Well, we thought planes were going to fall out of the sky then, but still on the table.
I mean, actually, it's a big part of the design of our robot, because if we ever have an incident where a robot ran into a person, you know, or harmed anybody, so a big part of our design are systems to identify all the people and fail safe because we can never afford to have with a robot, much like a self-driving car. You know, this extremely challenging problem. That environment. So before you can really let these things out, they have to be very safe.
Yeah, safety and security, they're pretty important for us as well, because if you're putting food into someone's body, then it needs to be really safe. So we had to design our robots so there were no sharp corners where bacteria could accumulate and all. And it cost us a year or a year and a half just to do that. And even in terms of payment, having good secure card reader systems, that's one of the key parts of our sales cycle. So yeah, it's something which impacts our business quite a bit.
No salad hacks.
But poisoning is up there amongst the top 5 or 6 causes of death in the US.
Yeah. Go figure.
All right, it's time for the lightning round. You guys ready? Quick questions, quick answers. Feel free to pass if you don't like them. Guido, I'm starting with you. For what occupation would you be most worried about robotics automating its activities?
For miners.
Andra.
Robotics automation. According to one of the most recent economic studies, it's going to be fashion models.
Bruce.
A lawyer. No.
Prep cooks?
Yeah.
All right. For what occupation are you least worried about robotics automating activities? Deepak.
Chefs. I guess inventory. So.
Fashion models.
I was going to say fashion models. Pass.
What significant technical limitation of robotics is the general business audience least aware of? Guido.
Battery power.
Stupid. Just stupid.
Well, you
Bruce.
took my.
Same one.
Yeah, I would have said power system.
Yeah, everyone thinks robots are going to be perfect. They work all the time. Robots take sick time off too.
You said they didn't.
You said 24/7.
All right. What application of robotics is most likely to accelerate and surprise people? Deepak.
I would say babysitting.
Bruce.
I guess, you know, 3D imaging of the world around us.
Andra.
I think perhaps recognizing us, because they're not very good at that yet. But I think there's a strong push to be better at personalizing and understanding a person's context, because that's the key to our wallet.
Guido.
Quality control.
If you could solve one problem around the future of work, what would it be? Guido.
The transition, the impact of people that are impacted by technology. Like, how do we help the people directly impacted?
Andra.
Pay us for having fun instead of us. You know, I think we should be heading to a consumer society.
Bruce.
Improving education.
Deepak.
Yeah, a low-cost education system.
What's your favorite source of information to keep abreast of developments in robotics and the future of work? Deepak.
I like TechCrunch.
Just going to work every day, I guess.
That too.
Andra.
Robohub.org.
And podcasts.
What television show or movie has your favorite depiction of people living or working alongside machines? Guido.
Blade Runner.
So many. I'm going Ex Machina.
I'm gonna pass.
The Jetsons.
What television show or movie has your least favorite depiction of people living or working alongside machines? Deepak.
So Blade Runner.
Terminator.
Oh yeah, that too. Westworld.
Wall-E.
Wall-E, yeah. That's a good
Given the changing future of work, what would you advise a high school student going to college to study?
Robotics.
Robotics.
whatever their passion is.
Yeah, robotics.
You weren't answering Bruce's question, were you? Okay. Finally, what one piece of advice would you have for the people in this room? Deepak.
Just keep learning new things and getting better all the time. You'll never have to worry about your jobs.
Bruce.
Change creates opportunity.
Andra.
And that we can make things change. We all have the power to do that.
Guido.
Focus on the macro, not the micro.
Please thank our panel.
Thank you very much. We know you have lots of choices for how to spend your evening. We appreciate that you came out to spend it with us tonight. As a very small token of our appreciation, we have for you the Churchill Club speaker t-shirt. Next time, Michael Chui, we're going to have to bring in a chest of drawers for you, for yours. Thank you very much. A recording of this program will be available on the Churchill Club YouTube channel within a couple of days, where you will find recordings of most of our other programs as well. We hope that you find that to be a useful resource. Our next program is next week, the morning of the 22nd, with Go-to-Market with Paul Weifels, who's here with us in the audience, and Andy Cunningham. Hope you can join us for that. And you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. Good night.